back to a Star Wars story. It is the 29th of August, 2023, and that means Ahsoka, Episode 3, premieres tonight at 8 p.m. Central Time. Again, as always, I'm not good with all of the local time stamps, but you can be absolutely certain that if you look up 8 p.m. Central and match it to your time zone, you'll find it. Let's see. Oh, Nora, hey! Thank you so much for joining. How are you this fine afternoon? Or, well, for me, it's afternoon. All right, so let's see here. Very good. Oh, well, that's great to hear. That is amazing to hear. I've been really excited. It was nice to. We late last night we got that leaked trailer, which was an absolute treat for me. I was super thrilled about that because it is. Well, I don't want to spoil it. To be fair, I don't want to spoil it. In terms of, it is leaked footage technically. I don't know if it's like officially gone up or not yet. Like I'm not sure of that, but I know I was really excited to watch it because it looks like it's going to tick a very important box for me, and I'll leave it at that. But again, it is great. It is exciting and thrilling, at least, to see how much we don't know from this, and by that I mean, it looks like, at least in my thought pattern, right, from the way that I think this story is going to play out, it looks like most of the footage, a significant portion of the footage that we've seen, is just from those first 4 episodes, and that means like we haven't seen anything at all from the latter half, which is. I'm really excited about that. I think that's just goes to show how much we don't know about this series. David, hey, thank you so much for joining. David says, "What about Thrawn?" So I assume you're meaning like Thrawn's appearance in the trailers as well. If we see Thrawn, like. The earliest I think we could see Thrawn is at the end of episode 4. But even then, like I'm not holding out for that. I feel like Thrawn and Ezra, and I'm happy to be wrong. I'm completely happy to be wrong. But I feel like Thrawn and Ezra won't play a role in the story until 6, 7, and 8. So those final 3 episodes is where those 2 characters are going to be introduced. I do not believe Ezra will just be involved in the finale. I do not believe Thrawn is only going to be involved in the final few minutes of the final episode. I don't think that's going to be the situation at all. I think Thrawn might be teased at the end of episode 4, and then 6, 7, and 8 is the big introduction to Thrawn and Ezra. And that's exciting to me. I think that's more than enough time to introduce them. Oh, just also because we know that this is leading into a movie, right? Nora says that's a long wait. It is. It is absolutely a long wait to get to episode 6, because we're only at episode 3. And from the footage that we have, I think we can kind of surmise what episode 3 is going to be. And because, again, I'm going to be vague here. I know, Nora, David, I know that both of you have seen the footage, but just for anybody else, I'm going to be vague. But if you go by how episode 3 looks to be going, and you match that up with the leaked footage, and you match that up with the trailer footage, then I think episode 4 is going to be what's left of the trailer footage. I think episode, again, I'm trying to be careful as vague as possible. But this is just me speculating. So, like, the encounter between Ahsoka and Baylan, I have a gut feeling that that's episode 4, and that's going to lead us into a really, really incredible second half. You know what I mean? Like that's my gut feeling. I mean, I don't know for certain. That's just me. But right now, I feel really strongly that if we look at the footage from episode 3 and then we look at the remaining footage that's in the trailer, I think episode 4 is going to be the encounter between Ahsoka and Baylan, and then I think episode 5 is going to be a very iconic episode because it's written and directed by Filoni. It's the only other episode Filoni's directing, so all bets are off. And I know everybody's kind of looking to that episode as a big turning point. So somewhere, like, if Thrawn appears, it will be 5. If Thrawn appears before, I personally don't see Thrawn appearing before 5. And again, I'm happy to be wrong. Even if it's like a little teaser, I would be so thrilled and over the moon. But like, Thrawn, to me, I feel like Filoni would do that episode. And then I think, if anything, like I said earlier, 6, 7, and 8 are going to be Thrawn and Ezra episodes. Like, they're going to feature heavily in those last 3 episodes. And that's also where I believe, again, a leak that we posted ages ago on this channel, I think we're going to get introduced to Captain Enoch. So I have a lot of expectation. And I also feel like I don't think Ahsoka is going to be a 1-season show. I think, if anything, we're going to get that season 2, and we're going to get, obviously, we'll get to the movie eventually, but the movie in this case is still a few years out, and right now we're dealing with an actor strike and a writer's strike. So there's a whole lot going on. But to me, this is just one part of the story. Nora says, so everyone survives. Yeah. I mean, this is just me. But like, in my gut, I don't think we're walking out of this with anyone dying. Ahsoka is going to survive for a very long time. There's no scenario and there's no situation where I believe Ahsoka will be killed off anytime soon, even in the movie. I think Ahsoka is going to be around for a very, very long time. She's a great connective tissue character across all these different sagas. I think Ahsoka is going to have a role to play far beyond even into the New Jedi Order era. Ahsoka and Grogu, I think, are going to be characters that stick around for a long time. And again, with aliens like Hera, and Mandalorians, again, like Sabine and Bo-Katan, you can still make a case that this is a space fantasy. This is a fantasy world. Age doesn't really matter. Age is completely irrelevant to these characters, so they could all be around for a very, very long time. And I would be shocked if anybody from the characters that Filoni created with George Lucas to what Filoni created after in terms of Rebels, I'll be very shocked if any of them end up killed anytime soon, whether it's season 2 of Ahsoka or what we're kind of unofficially calling the Heir to the Empire film. I think Thrawn's going to survive for a long time. I think Ahsoka's going to survive for a very long time. I believe the same way about Hera. I think Jacen Syndulla, Kanan's child, I believe very strongly that Ezra is going to train Jacen, and I think both of them will survive, and they'll have no connection to Luke's Jedi Temple. It's one of the big reasons why they removed Grogu from Luke's academy, because we know where that story ends up, so we have to get Grogu out of there. And I think the same is going to hold true for Jacen. I think Ezra is going to train Jacen. I think Ahsoka will continue training Sabine in terms of if she's... I would love it if Sabine's Force sensitive. I think that would be a great next step to her arc, especially coming out of her training with Kanan and her training with Ezra and that story arc from Rebels. I would love to see that thematic evolution. I think it would be great. And again, it goes back to what we saw in the original Star Wars, which I'm always nostalgic for. But I think Sabine being Force sensitive would be awesome. Now they haven't confirmed that. She's just an apprentice. She's just being trained in terms of lightsaber combat, in terms of Jedi ideals, I suppose. But I'm really, really hopeful that she ends up Force sensitive. Let's see. Nora says, "I would love a Force-sensitive Sabine." Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't see. And David says, "Me too." Yeah, I don't see how you don't. I mean, I don't see how it offers any problems. It's not any kind of major retcon because it's the Force. It surrounds us. It bonds us. It penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together. It's everywhere. It's everything. There's no hard and fast rule that says Sabine could not have been, can't be Force sensitive and that she can't open herself up to the Force. I would love it. Now, the question is what the situation is going to be with Ezra and what the situation is going to be with Jason when those characters are introduced, because to me, those are key characters. Now, obviously, we have a certain amount of time to play in this universe, right? We have 8 episodes. We have a tight arc, and we know that at least a portion of this story is going to take us beyond what we know in terms of the Star Wars galaxies, which is really, really thrilling. It harkens back for me to the Yuuzhan Vong, right? I loved the New Jedi Order series. I can nitpick a little bit because I always kind of follow the rule of what did A New Hope establish in terms of the Force surrounds all things. So I never did like how the Vong were disconnected from it. And again, George Lucas made it clear he did not agree with that either. And when the plan was to introduce the Vong into the Clone Wars, there was going to be retcons because that wasn't George Lucas's idea. Nothing can exist, nothing can be outside of or created outside of the Force is in everything. So there was a lot of stuff, even back in the day when George Lucas was planning his sequel trilogy. Unfortunately, everything post Return of the Jedi, the expanded universe that we love, Lucas was going to utterly destroy. Because it was Lucas who was now, I don't know, maybe the expanded universe would have found ways to retcon it and be like, oh no, Chewie's alive and this or that. But, and this is how, but like Chewbacca there was never going to be a hint in Lucas's sequel trilogy that Chewbacca was dead, right? It wasn't even going to be like a plot point, like Chewbacca was alive and fine, or, and all that. So it was always going to be different, under Lucas with the Vong. And then even before that, before the Vong were these kind of the extragalactic absence in the Force, they were originally a race of Darksiders, right? They were going to be a race of Darksiders that had fled the galaxy. And this goes all the way back to the 90s. This were the earliest discussions of the New Jedi Order. This was the original plan. It wasn't going to be called the Yuuzhan Vong. It wasn't even going to be called the Yuuzhan Vong, which was their original name. Originally, they were extragalactic Darksiders that, at least as far as the development went, they were going to be they were going to be an offshoot of the Sith species, and they were going to be ancient Sith that had fled the galaxy thousands of years ago, and they were returning. Basically imagine that line from The Force Awakens: darkness rises and the light to meet it. So the light was rising and the dark was going to meet it, right? And that was going to be the plot of the New Jedi Order. These extragalactic dark side exiles were returning to the galaxy. And it feels like right now, again, just going off the content that we've had delivered to us within these 2 episodes, and again, looking at the trailers and trying, piecing together as much as we can, it looks like, at least spiritually, Filoni was inspired by the original plot outline for New Jedi Order before Lucas overwrote it. And again, it's a little touch and go in terms of how involved Lucas was, but ever so often he would come in and say, you can't do that. And a lot of time before the prequels, the prequels were off limits, and we're not going to, and there's no big, and you couldn't do a dark side army at that point. I guess because he didn't want a lot of, the story goes anyway, that he didn't want a lot of overlap with thematic elements of the prequels. That, with whether it was Anakin Solo, whether we're using the name Anakin, or Darksiders coming back with this kind of war, he didn't want overlap in terms of those kind of thematic elements. So, but there's still a lot that George, it's widely known when they were creating, and this is something that Tom even told me. Unfortunately, he passed away. But Tom Viet, the writer of a significant portion of Tales of the Jedi, and the writer for the Dark Empire comic, he was very renowned. And I believe this was. And unfortunately, he didn't finish his autobiographical book, kind of charting his history in terms of his authorship and the Star Wars segment. But from what he told me, it was very plainly. Originally, Dark Empire was going to kind of be built around, the Empire is, here's a Darth Vader wannabe. And it was going to, the Empire had brought someone to wear the Darth Vader suit. It was going to be this dark entity, and that was going to be the inciting incident. A resurrected Emperor was never involved. George Lucas, though, in the early EU days, George Lucas overrode that. So Lucas saw the outline for the plot and that they were going to have someone dressed in the Darth Vader suit, and he basically he told Lucas Publishing, who told Tom, this is how it goes in the business, he told Lucas Publishing, you can't do that. No one wears the Vader suit again. Have the Emperor come back. Right? So that was it. So then they went to Tom and said, you can't do a Darth Vader wannabe. You have to do the Emperor. So you can bring the Emperor back and have the kids and have Luke and Leia fight him. And that came directly, and that's what came from George. But then I had a great extensive talk with Tom about Tales of the Jedi, and he described the ancient Sith, right? And one of the things that he described about in terms of creating the Sith history, the origins of the Sith, Ajunta Paul, the 100-year, all these things, all these concepts about where the origins of the Sith and the Sith species and being Dark Lords of the Sith, that all came from Tom's imagination. George Lucas never read it. He never offered notes on it. He never gave approval or disapproval. And again, this is very clearly from Tom and his relationship with Lucas Publishing. George Lucas had no involvement in the creation of the Sith, whether it is the species, whether it is Korriban, the Jedi exiles, the name Ajunta Paul, the first exiles. Lucas had no involvement or oversight whatsoever, and he didn't offer any notes. Tom had no notes. Everything was created from his imagination and then the artists that worked on that series. And I think that speaks to the collaborative effort of Star Wars. Like, yes, George Lucas created it, right? But it was never his. Even in the 90s, it was never him doing all of these concepts. What we know about the history of the Sith, none of it came from Lucas except for Darth Bane and the Rule of Two. That's it. The actual origins, the 100-year darkness, the schism, even going all the way back to Tython, none of it came from Lucas. Lucas had never detailed or offered any input or insight to any of the authors on the origins of the Jedi or Sith. And he continued to offer little to no information except for the odd rule here or there. There was the rule that there were to be no Wookiee Jedi until he allowed a Wookiee Jedi in Clone Wars, which again, just, Lucas's imagination. He was always all over the place, kind of like, oh, no, we can do this or we can do that, right? And then, again, ultimately with New Jedi Order, where the original plot outline were Sith exiles that were returning to the galaxy, Lucas was like, yeah, you can't do that. And so then they created the Yuuzhan Vong, which Lucas eventually, so the story goes anyway, Lucas was unhappy with the Yuuzhan Vong, so when they were bringing them into the Clone Wars, the Yuuzhan Vong were not going to exist outside of the Force, that they could be sensed in the Force. Like, Lucas was going to completely retcon significant portions of that book. And that just goes to show how his ideas about the expanded universe were always, it's second. It's second, and he might take ideas from it, right? That was pretty much it. And I think that's interesting. I always think stuff like that's interesting. It's like when Lucas was building his sequel trilogy, Darth Maul was going to survive all the way to his sequel trilogy, and Darth Maul and Darth Talon were going to be the villains of it. And I think that shows how George Lucas just kind of went with the flow a little bit. He had some ideas that went back to the 70s, but overall, like, Darth Maul and Darth Talon, like them playing a role, that was never in the cards or in the plan, right? And he didn't create Darth Talon. Darth Talon was created by Ostrander and Durisma for the Star Wars Legacy comics, which took place 140 some odd years after A New Hope. So, and I don't know how they would have dealt with that retcon. Honestly, I've always thought about, and I'm interested in the kind of scenario of what would the expanded universe have looked like if Lucas had made his sequel trilogy. It would have been a mess, but would they have tried to retcon all these different deaths and things to make it fit, or would they have done just like Disney did and said, listen, we can't rectify any of this information. None of it works anymore. And just pretty much clean slate and started over from George Lucas's sequel trilogy. But all of this goes to say, I am really excited to see if Filoni is taking inspiration from the original New Jedi Order concept. And that to me is exciting, just because, again, it's kind of nostalgic bait. I grew up with New Jedi Order. I read it as it came out. So I'm particular. Let's see. Norris says, I love NJO. Ah, nice. And Norris says, didn't know anything about that, though. Yeah, I mean, again, everybody's different levels of Star Wars fan, in terms of, we all come to it from different perspectives. We consume different layers and levels. I love behind the scenes, especially just because of my professional history in production. I honestly, my career, like, I don't say this lightly, but my career was heavily inspired by growing up with the behind the scenes of Star Wars. Watching the DVDs, watching the Phantom Menace DVD, Attack, that was a serious inspiration to a lot of what I did professionally. And I think that's true for a lot of people who work on Star Wars even. It's impossible, if you grew up with Star Wars in your life, it's really impossible not to be influenced by it. It's really impossible for it not to have inspired aspects or parts of your life. That's why I don't like conversations about what is and isn't a Star Wars fan. It serves no purpose. It's weird to gatekeep that, as if random people online can tell you that you're not a fan is ridiculous. It's absurd. People can't tell you whether or not you are and are not a valid fan. No matter when you came in or when you were born, whatever your first Star Wars is. My first Star Wars was the original trilogy on VHS, just prior to the special editions. That was my first Star Wars. A New Hope, Empire, Return of the Jedi. Before the internet, before DVDs, watched it on VHS for the first time at home and experienced it that way. And I was 5 years old, and I was utterly shocked as that unfolded, and as we watched that. I will always vividly have these memories. We got the original trilogy, and every Saturday we watched so it was A New Hope on a Saturday, and then the very next Saturday it was Empire Strikes Back, and then the very next Saturday it was Return of the Jedi. And it was an incredible experience that shaped a lot of my career direction in terms of my storytelling, in terms of what I've written with novels, in terms of the work I've done in production. If you have a relationship with Star Wars, however it started, you're just as much of a fan as another person. I love the behind the scenes, so I absorb all of that information. I love it. I'm fascinated by it. But there's no one that is a lesser Star Wars fan. Whether you came in with the prequels and those were your first films, whether the first film you ever watched was the sequel trilogy, whether the first thing you watched was the Clone Wars cartoon, or Rebels, or Resistance, or The Mandalorian, like every point, these are all touchstones that make you just as much of a valid fan. However you choose to consume it. If you just choose to watch the material, that's great. If you choose to watch material and dig through the behind the scenes and the special features, that's awesome. If you read the books, if you read the makings of, I highly recommend Paul Duncan's Star Wars Archives. I have those, and those are glorious. It's just a treasure trove of information, and it just goes to show like how much of so many people contributed to Star Wars, right? It's so much more than just Lucas. That's why I mention people like Ostrander and Durisma, and I apologize if I'm butchering their names, or when we talk about Ian McKeag, or when we talk about Dave Filoni, or Timothy Zahn, when we talk about Tom. I mean, any of these people, they brought to Star Wars so much material that George Lucas had nothing to do with. And to say that they don't deserve credit for what they created is really ridiculous. And to say that Star Wars is only one person is really unfair and detrimental to the hard work that these people put into it. It's crazy to me. They deserve the recognition, and they deserve to make a living off of their work because they created touchstones. They created pillars of canon that is still referenced to this day. The Old Republic, Knights of the Old Republic, all of that exists not because of George Lucas, but because of the backstory that Tom created in Tales of the Jedi. I mean, to say otherwise is disingenuous. Coruscant exists because of Timothy Zahn. I mean, again, Thrawn exists because of Timothy Zahn. The Nogri exist because of Timothy Zahn. And I could go on and on and on. There are so many concepts and planets and creatures and mythology and world building that exists outside of Lucas, right? So when Star Wars ends and when Star Wars begins, it is completely subjective, right? So your first Star Wars is whatever your first Star Wars is. That makes you a Star Wars fan, and I think that's awesome. Whatever whatever you choose to be like, this is where Star Wars ends for me. Not many people read the comics, and that's fine. I know the novels are pretty popular. Thankfully, I love reading. And as an author, like obviously people, I always want people buying books. You know what I'm saying? But it's a case of like, if you don't have the time, or if you choose like, I don't read the comics, that's fine. That doesn't make you lesser of a fan. There's might be characters that you don't know about, but that's it. And even then, there's so much crossover now, especially to a degree that Lucas never really did. There's such crossover now between all this, in terms of this multimedia empire, that a character from the comics can and is likely to jump over. I have Chrysanthemum's first appearance in Marvel's Darth Vader issue 1, 2015. 2015 is when Chrysanthemum made his first appearance, and now he's got action figures in the Vintage Collection. He's got a really crappy Black Series action figure, and he's in Book of Boba Fett. That's awesome. That's really freaking cool. That's great that evolution started, and here we are. It still makes me wonder, though, where the heck is Aphra? How has Aphra not made the jump yet? That is absolutely crazy to me. Nora says, I know. Give Afra a show. I absolutely agree. I still like the best place to put her in is Star Wars Outlaws, which I know isn't live action, but again, the way that they're building up a lot of these game projects and the way that they're using actors and using their likenesses, I mean, casting someone for Outlaws is basically setting the table for a live action appearance. But I'm right there with you. Like, I am utterly shocked that Afra has not made the jump yet. But Outlaws really does seem like the perfect place. Outlaws also seems like the perfect place to bring back Kira. Kira actually has, and again, Kira from Solo: A Star Wars Story, she actually has a really significant story in the comics that are post Empire Strikes Back and prior to Return of the Jedi. Will says, who's Afra? Afra is a comic book character. She made her first appearance in you've never seen the comics. I highly recommend them. Our next Patreon is going to be our next Patreon gift is going to be an Afra comic book arc. So I'm digging through right now, but Afra made her first appearance in the new canon in Marvel Star Wars, and she's an archaeologist. She's gotten a vintage collection figure. She's gotten a Black Series figure. She's got a lot of recognition and a lot of love. And she's Dr. Shell Afra. I apologize. I might not be pronouncing that name correctly. But there is a lot of popularity around her in terms of the I still call it the expanded universe, but in terms of the expanded universe of the comics and books even. And I feel like she'd make a great transition to to the Outlaws video game. Let's see. Ryan Johnson says, with the newest Indiana Jones movie not doing great, I think they'd be hesitant to release an Afra show. I mean, honestly, now again, in terms of this kind of ongoing conversation, the Indiana Jones film has so far broken even. Now, no, it didn't explode the box office, but Indiana Jones' last film didn't. So I think coming off of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I would consider Dial of Destiny quite the success. But I don't think Indiana Jones should have an effect on Afra, because Afra can easily fit into any kind of underworld scenario. Hell, I assume Outlaws is going to be very successtal, and I'll be shocked if we don't get some kind of underworld mini series or some kind of event series set in the underworld. Now, that was something Lucas wanted to do. Now, he wanted to set it in a different time period, but Lucas did want to do Star Wars Underworld. And Rangers of the New Republic, one of the oldest leaks for Rangers of the New Republic before that show was canceled, is that Rangers of the New Republic was going to deal with a bit of a criminal element. No one knew if that meant Kira. No one knew exactly who was going to be a part of this criminal element, but Rangers of the New Republic was going to build off Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian Season 3 and deal into kind of this growing criminal underworld. And I still wonder where that story, or if that story will be adapted anywhere, because I think there's room. I absolutely think that there is room for more kind of Book of Boba Fett. Not exactly Book of Boba Fett. I'm trying to find the right way to phrase it, but because Book of Boba Fett was so specific, right? Like, Book of Boba Fett was telling a very specific story, but it's still about kind of a kingpin kind of thing, right? Like, Boba Fett's now in power. So what is the next part of that story? Is it more Book of Boba Fett? Is it something Outlaws-esque? Like, I'm really excited for that, and I think Afra could easily fit into a story like that. Casual Gamer says hi. Hey, Casual Gamer. And then Nora loved Dial of Destiny. I thoroughly enjoyed Dial of Destiny. And holy crap, that prologue with young Harrison Ford. Like, they are really advancing that technology in terms of the combination of deep fake and re-speecher. Like, holy cow, they're really getting to a point where it's I mean, when you compare it to the appearance of Tarkin and Leia in Rogue One in 2016, and look where we are now in 2023, like, holy crap. We're nearly at a point where young Luke, Han, and Leia is increasingly likely in Dave Filoni's movie. And I think that's awesome. I do. I think that's awesome. I mean, how long was that prologue in Indiana Jones? Like 30 minutes of young Harrison and de-aged, deep-faked Harrison and de-aged and deep-fake Mads Mikkelsen. Like, it seemed like it was about 30 minutes. But, I mean, it was an incredible 30 minutes. Visually, absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I feel like that's the kind of stuff where I imagine George Lucas must be so proud to see technology. I know Lucas loved the volume. One of the things coming out of Celebration was all the talk about George Lucas's reaction to a lot of this, and I always love hearing stories. But this is what Lucas was building toward when he wanted to do Star Wars Underworld, when he wanted to do that show. The technology wasn't there, though. There was no way to do it. The budget, they couldn't get there. And here we are now, and here we are with unbelievable deep fake technology and unbelievable, virtual sets. And this is the kind of stuff that Lucas was dreaming of. This is what George Lucas wanted to be creating. He wanted to be at this cutting edge next step technology. And there's still a lot of interesting stories about Lucas's views on what he wanted to do with the sequel trilogy, and how his episode 7 was going to feature a young Luke, Han, and Leia. And it's like, Lucas, now there's a couple of conflicting reports here, because Mark Hamill said that he and Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford were always involved right back to Lucas's designs. And then of course Lucas revealed that his episode 7 was only a few, years after. So Lucas was either going to recast or deep fake / de-age. And the ongoing theory, or the ongoing gossip anyway, at Celebration was that Lucas was actively pursuing deep fake technology. And it's crazy to think how much ahead of the curve he was. Like, just what he saw was possible. I mean, that's impressive, because it's George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Again, they predicted streaming. They knew we were going to get here. And I don't know. I think that's really impressive. I think that says a lot about their creativity. It says a lot about their business acumen, and it says a lot about their wherewithal. Like, they understood the industry, but not only did they understand the industry, they understood the consumer. And when I say consumer, I don't mean that as a negative. They understood that how people watch stuff was going to change. And they also knew that the technology was getting to a point where they were going to be capable of a lot more, potentially for a lot less, so to speak. Ryan says, whether it's recast or de-age / deepfake, it'd be weird if the OT cast was involved in Filoni's movie somehow. And yeah, I absolutely, completely agree. In terms of unofficially the Heir to the Empire film, that's what I'm still calling it. But in terms of that, I can't imagine those three not being involved somehow. To me, it's just I can't imagine it. And maybe that's nostalgia, maybe that's nostalgia just because of how I feel about those books and about this particular Heir to the Empire, the Thrawn trilogy. I could be a little biased, absolutely, but they have to be. They have to be. Let's see. Oh, Nora. Nora says, do you think we'll see how Luke met Ahsoka? Yes. I think I absolutely 100% believe Dave Filoni will tell that story. Yeah, I was actually thinking about this because let's see, where are we at? 3:55, and it is 40 minutes. Okay, so I was thinking about this. I don't think the Ahsoka show is going to have the time for it. I really don't. But I feel really, really strongly that Tales of the Jedi Season 2, I bet the farm that Season 2 of Tales of the Jedi will have a story arc about how Luke and Ahsoka met. I can't imagine that not being a part of Tales of the Jedi, because it feels like perfect bait, right? And I'm sure I'm not the only one who thought about this, but I cannot imagine it, because it is perfect Tales of the Jedi bait. You get an Ahsoka story arc in Tales of the Jedi, which feels like a no-brainer with Filoni, and then to introduce Luke into the animated style, they got to. I would be utterly shocked if that's not a part of Tales of the Jedi, because Luke and Ahsoka meeting, that's not going to be. Dave Filoni's going to want to tell that story. That's not going to be in a comic. That's not going to be in a book. Filoni wants to tell that story, and I truly believe that he will tell it in animation, and I think that's going to be a story in Tales of the Jedi Season 2. Casual Gamer says, Greg, do you think we will get a new Star Wars Battlefront game this current console generation? So, if everything is to be believed, the current console generation is going to be ending between 2025 and 2026. In that time frame, I don't think so. Which sucks. I would love to be proven wrong, but I don't think so. If you look at what's coming out from Star Wars right now, okay, we have Knights of the Old Republic remake, we have Outlaws, we have a first-person shooter that's not Battlefront that is in development at Respawn. And this first-person shooter is said to be a spiritual successor to the Dark Forces game, which Dark Forces is getting a remaster. I'm not going to count the remaster because it's literally only a remaster. So in terms of brand new from the ground up games, we have Knights of the Old Republic remake, we have Outlaws, we have the untitled Dark Forces spiritual successor. We have a Star Wars RTS, which is supposed to be a AAA quality real-time strategy game in the spirit of Empire at War. And then we have the leaked Mando/Boba Fett game. This is still highly debated because of the weird image that got out, because it was just a Mandalorian helmet with a T-visor. To me, it looked like it had an antenna, so I think it's Boba Fett, but I know that's debated, and that's fine. But just in terms of the scheduling, I don't think we're going to get another Battlefront. And if we do, I hope it's by a completely different team, because the rebooted Battlefront wasn't really my cup of tea, I suppose. Ryan Johnson asks, do we know for sure that Ahsoka Episode 1 and 2 happens after we see Ahsoka in Book of Boba Fett? Yes. As far as the Star Wars timeline, and as far as how we've come to understand what Dave Filoni was saying at Celebration. So this Book of Boba Fett occurs in nine years after the Battle of Yavin. And Dave Filoni, when talking about Ahsoka, he said that, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because I don't have the exact quote right in front of me, but he very clearly said that Ahsoka is the latest in the timeline. It is after Book of Boba Fett. It is current, and it is still in that 9 years after the Battle of Yavin window. So we're still 9 ABY. As far as how I've pieced it together, and this is just me, but Ahsoka goes to meet with Ahsoka meets with Luke, and then she leaves to go to the witch's temple that we see in the first episode of Ahsoka. I believe, and this is me, but I believe that Ahsoka is happening concurrently with season 3 of The Mandalorian and potentially the later half, like the end of Book of Boba Fett and season 3 of Mandalorian. I think Ahsoka is overlapping with that. And the reason I believe that is because in the Mandalorian episode where Zeb appears, Dave Filoni, now maybe Dave Filoni was just messing with us, maybe he was trolling us, but Dave Filoni said, wait till you see who Zeb is talking to in the rest of the scene. Now that leads me to believe that there is, I mean, again, unless he's trolling us, that live action scene is going to continue. And where else will it continue? I assume it will continue in Ahsoka, and we will see the second half of that conversation. We will see the conclusion of whatever story he's telling with Zeb, I assume getting back with the rebels. Now, I could go on to speculate, significant will become clear once we see the rest of that scene with Zeb that Filoni was talking about, because I have to give Filoni credit. I have followed his career since his first appearance at Celebration, and when he says something, he follows through. He is not someone to screw around with the fan base or to troll us too heavily. He will tease us heavily, but anytime he teases, he follows through and delivers with an answer to that tease. So whatever's happening with Zeb, whoever he's going to end up talking to, is, I believe, in my opinion, a part of Ahsoka. And if it's not a part of Ahsoka, the only other thing that makes sense is Skeleton Crew. Because I don't see where else that Zeb conversation, I don't see where else that scene fits in. But I imagine, because again, I imagine a lot of that will become clear. Especially, it looks like, I'm very interested to see how this pans out, because some of the footage from tonight's episode looks like it's going to involve the New Republic a little bit. I don't want to get my hopes up. And again, I manage my expectations because I know, this is me hyping myself up. But if they're involving the New Republic already, I wonder if this is where we might see the rest of Zeb's conversation. Again, I don't know that for certain. That's just me speculating. But as far as the timeline, it is after Book of Boba Fett, and it is quote-unquote current, which I assume means it is concurrent and simultaneous to Season 3 of Mandalorian. Okay. Casual Gamer says, when do you think the Boba Mando game could be announced and released? Honestly, so looking at Outlaws, I feel like a Boba Mando game would be really close to Outlaws, so I don't think they would want to release it close to that. So I think 2024 is really going to belong to Outlaws and Not So the Old Republic if it's not delayed again. The question is which one gets the first half of the year and which one gets the second half of the year? You know what I mean? Like, those are two really big titles. So, what's their window? Who gets what? I feel like Outlaws is going to be the early half of the year. That was the gossip at San Diego Comic-Con anyway. Everybody was, and again, obviously gossip doesn't mean anything, but the gossip at San Diego was, this is going to be early 2024, which means Old Republic is late 2024, which means, I just keep going, any type of Mandalorian game would be at the earliest 2025. And we're also still waiting on that spiritual successor to Dark Forces. The question is, and this is me entertaining this because we don't know, the Dark Forces inspired game could involve a Mandalorian or or Boba Fett. It could potentially be one and the same. We simply don't know. We don't have enough information on all these different leaks. But I still feel like it was Boba Fett. That's me, though. I know people, I know, because there are so many Mandalorians and they all have that T-visor, but I don't know. My gut tells me it was Boba. And then Polly, I'm gonna go with Polly, said in Dave we trust. Oh, and Nora says, in Dave we trust. Absolutely. Again, I talked about this last week in our live stream coming off of the Ahsoka fan event. Filoni is truly the successor to. Is truly the successor to George Lucas. We can talk about Master and Apprentice, and we can talk about that whole kind of relationship, but like Filoni really is living up to that, and I think it's incredible. I really do, to see the work that he did, because I know. Listen, if I worked with George Lucas on the last thing George Lucas ever did with Star Wars, I would not abandon that character. Now that's me. I mean, again, maybe other people are different, and that's fine. But between my love of this universe, my love for these characters, and even just the times that I've gotten to meet the cast and crew that worked on that have worked on these projects that I loved as a kid, like Filoni is carrying that torch. He is George's apprentice. Like that is the highest regard. Like him carrying on with Ahsoka and carrying on these stories, who would get in Filoni's shoes and decide, oh yeah, I worked with Lucas on the last Star Wars thing he ever did, and I'm going to abandon these. I mean, you can't. A part of it's nostalgia, and a part of it is there's a beautiful relationship there. But also, he's not sacrificing story. He's telling amazing stories in animation and live action. His Tales of the Jedi work, I mean, I'm sorry, but Tales of the Jedi was incredible. Those Ahsoka episodes and the Dooku episodes, those were amazing. And the first 2 episodes of Ahsoka were absolutely amazing. He parallels, even visually, the visual poetry that Lucas did in terms of paralleling his shots, Filoni does the same thing. And it touches like that, yeah, there's going to be people who don't notice it, and that's cool. That's fine. But for those who do, it's an added treat. And it can be nostalgic, and it can be rewarding, and there's nothing wrong with any of that, because you're supposed to watch these things and feel good, whether you feel like a kid again or whether you watch them with your family and you get to share that experience for the first time with your own kids. It's Star Wars, It is this kind of pop culture significant event that is generational now. I mean, we're approaching 50 years of Star Wars. And yeah, Lucas isn't involved anymore. Lucas has not been involved in Star Wars for 11 years. 11 years Lucas has not been involved with Star Wars. But he taught Filoni really well. And he taught that crew really well, because again, this isn't just about Filoni. This is about Killian Plunkett. This is about Joel Aaron. This is about Matthew Wood and the sound crew. This is about every apprentice coming off of Ben Burtt, coming off of Ralph McQuarrie. This is about the stuff that Doug Chang did. Like, these people are carrying that Star Wars banner proudly. And I love seeing it. I really do. It's 14 million much. Polly said Dave is basically Lucas ideas-wise, but he makes everything cool with fantastic writing. Yeah, Dave Filoni, he comes from a place of loving Star Wars. Polly and Jip both are asking about 14 million. That comes directly from Lucasfilm. That was a part of a press release that went out this morning. The Ahsoka premiere was watched by 14 million. That is an incredible streaming number. Those are Stranger Things numbers. That's really, really impressive, especially for a character coming off of a couple of short appearances and coming off from a beloved animated series. So, yeah, those are amazing numbers. The first episode alone, I'm looking at the press release again. The first episode alone had 14 million viewers, and that is directly from Lucasfilm's own press release. Nora says, so wonderfully said. Oh, thank you. I mean, again, I feel like any fan, anybody who grew up with Star Wars and loves Star Wars, anyone who's put into a position where they're working on Star Wars, I think we would all be Dave Filoni. if we got to work with George Lucas before he retired and we created a character with George Lucas, who could let that character go? Jip says, real quick before I get to Casual Gamer, because this is kind of tied into the 14 million. Jip says, hold on, I thought that the viewers were bad. Those viewership numbers, again, there was clickbait that was grabbed by Samba. Samba TV is a TV application. It is a TV application that is a setting only on certain TVs, and it's only in the U.S. So certain TVs in the U.S. with tracking turned on share their data. And Samba ran a 1.4 million number. That number was then taken by grifters and clickbait, and again, people who want, we've talked about this on the channel before, who want to radicalize and who want to very divisively separate the Star Wars fandom and destroy it from within, is how I feel. So they took that number and they ran with it, and they've been posting a lot of significantly false, like deliberately false and misleading information, which I, again, continue to find appalling, because all that's doing is radicalizing very dangerous individuals because of the echo chambers that they exist in. So, and I could get on a whole tangent about that. I did in the last live stream, but I disagree with deliberately feeding incorrect information to anger or to empower your angry viewer base. It just makes no sense to me. But 14 million is huge. Those are massive numbers for a streaming series. If you take that in terms of revenue generation, if you take that into Disney Plus subscribers, the first episode of Ahsoka alone generated $154 million. Think about that. This was a massive success. That is huge. Those are huge numbers. And we're not, and again, my whole thing is, we celebrate Star Wars here, but we tell the truth. We're going to be honest. We're not here to feed misinformation. We're not here to be angry about women being involved in Star Wars. We're here to welcome every fan. Everyone, if you love Star Wars, you're a fan and you're welcome here. But we're going to keep it honest. We're going to keep it honest, and we're going to keep the leaks coming, hopefully. I'm sure Lucasfilm isn't happy about the leaks, but I get excited. What am I going to do? All right, so we're getting close to wrapping up. I'm going to take these last few questions. Casual Gamer, I'm going to go back to your question real quick. When do you think we will get an update on KOTOR Remake? Is it true Saber is now the developer? The last I heard is that, yes, Saber was the developer. There is... I have a video coming on the KOTOR remake that I'm still actively working on. I've reached out to a few people who work at Saber. I'm hoping to be able to get some quotes from them, and I'm hoping to try to get some information from these companies, but I've reached out to Embracer and I have reached out to Saber. I'm working on that video, so I'm going to have as detailed and accurate information as I can get. But KOTOR is coming. I've been assured of that. The KOTOR remake is coming. It is in active development. I believe it is at Saber. I am just I'm saying I believe. I'm trying to get official word on where it's at right now. So I don't want to speak. I don't want to speak ahead of myself. But I am working on a video, and I hope to have that done relatively soon. It's a matter of when people get back to me. Let's see. Polly says all of Dave's stuff either retroactively or proactively makes other Star Wars better. I absolutely agree. Ryan says Jennifer Corbett has been killing it with Bad Batch as well. Feels like she really took a lot of what George and Dave did in their work and kept it going. Again, I absolutely agree with that. We can keep making that joke about Master and Apprentice and about legacy and lineage. Like the whole relationship of where it started with George and what it's going on to with these other creators, we are seeing so much of an improvement, and Bad Batch is incredible. Yes, I know it has episodes that are very standalone, and I know it is very episodic, but when Bad Batch is at its best, it's at its freaking best. Polly says 14 million is huge. Streamers never share numbers themselves unless it's really good. And Jip says third parties like Samba isn't always right. Again, I absolutely agree with you. Polly says good words. Jip says just give Dave more shows. I'm right there with you. He needs more. We need that season 2 of Ahsoka. Polly says I hate the radicalization clickbait from others. I do too, because it's tough because they want. I mean, they really are kind of infectious. I've had to, even making the videos I've made in this very short amount of time I've been doing this for Star Wars, like, holy crap, I've had to limit and restrict so many users because they just want to take over and control every comment section in every video. And I'm like, that's not this channel. That's not what we do here. You have places where you can hate and grovel, but and you've taken control of so many places everywhere else online, but it's not going to be here. Casual Gamer says, if Boba is a 2025 game, do you think it will be announced later next year? It would have to be if it's a 2025 game. It would have to be announced later next year. Maybe even if it's a 2025 game, again, we could see an announcement at the Game Awards, but that's just me speculating wildly. We could also see it announced at Celebration Japan. Star Wars Celebration Japan is a good point for it. Okay, Polly says Omega's theme is amazing. I agree. And the last question we're taking from Casual, and this will be the last question. Do you think we will get Darth Revan or the Old Republic introduced in the current canon? Do you think we will get a show or movie for the Old Republic? Absolutely. I actually have a video on that. If you look at my Keanu Reeves is joining Star Wars video, that has some information I've kind of been able to gather. I highly recommend you watch and check that out. Okay, thank you all so much. I'm, again, still new to this Star Wars channel. I'm always so grateful when people take the time to like and subscribe and to check us out. I want to specifically give a shout out to Nora and to Dave. They're both amazing, wonderful patrons. Thank you all so much. I mean, again, to have anybody continue to watch and to join, I'm so grateful, and I feel really, really blessed that we can talk Star Wars and celebrate it and have a good time. You know, we should be propping each other up. And thank you so much for checking us out. So I'll be back tonight. We're gonna watch Ahsoka tonight, and I'm gonna get my review up as soon as possible tonight. It's gonna be spoiler free. So thank you so much. Hopefully we can do another live stream this week. I'm hoping to get onto a better schedule with live streams besides just on Tuesday. So again, thank you. Above all else and most importantly, stay safe, take care of others, and remember the Force will be with you.